Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the new Iron Man after Tony Stark's sacrifice. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain in Muzidafu had a particular rhythm, a soft, percussive beat against the pavement that Izuku Midoriya had long ago memorized. It was a sound of home, of familiarity, of the unchangeable backdrop to a life that felt increasingly, suffocatingly small. Tonight, it wasn't a comforting patter. It was a mournful dirge, each drop a tiny punctuation mark on the sentence that had been handed down to him earlier that day. "I'm sorry, kid, but no. You can't become a hero without a quirk." The words, spoken by the one man he revered above all others, echoed in the cavern of his skull. All Might. The symbol of peace. His hero. The man whose smile could stop villains in their tracks had looked at him, not with a smile, but with a tired, pitying pragmatism that had shattered something deep inside Izuku's soul. He clutched the strap of his yellow backpack, the worn fabric a familiar weight against his damp school uniform. His shoes squelched, his green-black hair was plastered to his forehead, and a chill that had nothing to do with the weather seeped into his bones. He just wanted to go home, to crawl into bed and maybe, just maybe, wake up to find this entire day had been a nightmare. The sludge villain, Kaken's capture, the desperate, suicidal rush to save him, and the final, crushing verdict from his idol. His gaze fell to the notebook clutched in his other hand. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. Its pages were slightly warped from the damp, the ink of his frantic scribbles threatening to bleed. For years, this habit had been his lifeline. It was his way of participating, of connecting to the world of heroes he so desperately wanted to join. He would watch fights, analyze quirks, theorize support gear, and map out battle strategies with a manic intensity that others found creepy. It was the closest he could get to having a power of his own. But now, the notebook felt like evidence of his own delusion. A multi-volume testament to a fool's dream. "It's not bad to dream," All Might had said, a hollow platitude after the execution. "But you have to be realistic." Realistic. The word tasted like ash. Realism was the jeer of his classmates. Realism was the concerned, gentle sadness in his mother's eyes. Realism was Kaken's explosive anger, his constant, brutal reminder. "You're a useless Deku. A quirkless nobody." A sudden, concussive boom ripped through the quiet street, shaking the windows of the nearby apartment buildings. It was followed by a strange, warping sound, like a giant tearing a sheet of metal in half. Izuku's head snapped up, his ingrained instincts overriding his despair in a heartbeat. A block ahead, at a busy intersection, the night was lit by a chaotic, swirling vortex of purple and black energy. A villain. His feet, which a moment ago had been dragging with the weight of his shattered hopes, were now moving. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a reflex honed by a decade of hero worship. He ran, not towards the danger to be a hero, but towards it because he had to see, to understand. He skidded to a halt behind a police barricade, his eyes wide, his analytical mind already kicking into overdrive, pushing his personal misery to a quiet corner. The villain was a lanky man in a cheap, theatrical costume, all dark leather and unnecessary spikes. His quirk was the source of the chaos. He would gesture, and the space around him would seem to fold, to pinch and twist like fabric. A car, caught in the effect, was suddenly compressed into a mangled cube of metal. A lamppost bent at an impossible 90-degree angle without breaking. The pro-hero on the scene, the arboreal Kamui Woods, was struggling. Every time he sent his lacquered branches to ensnare the villain, the man, who the news reporters were calling distortion, would simply warp the space around the attack, causing the wood to tie itself into knots or veer off into a nearby building. "His quirk isn't teleportation," Izuku muttered, his voice a low, frantic whisper. His hand twitched, longing for a pen. "It's spatial manipulation, but it's localized and unstable. He's not moving objects, he's warping the space they occupy. It's like pinching a piece of paper. The range is limited, maybe 15 meters, and there's a refractory period. See, after each big warp he stumbles. It must cause some kind of cognitive or physical backlash. A 5-second cooldown, maybe 6. He was so engrossed in his analysis, in the familiar comfort of the problem, that he didn't notice he was inching closer to the edge of the barricade. He saw it before Kamui Woods did, a pattern. Distortion wasn't just defending, he was trying to warp the ground beneath the hero's feet. He was creating a trap. "It's a feint!" Izuku shouted, the words tearing out of him before he could stop them. "He's targeting the ground! He's trying to collapse the street!" A few police officers glanced at him, annoyed. But Distortion heard him. The villain's head, clad in a mask that looked like a shattered mirror, snapped in his direction. His eyes, visible through the cracks, widened with fury and panic. He had been found out. By some nerdy kid. In his rage, he abandoned his plan and gestured wildly, not at Kamui Woods, but directly at Izuku. It wasn't a precise, controlled warp. It was a chaotic, uncontrolled surge of his quirk, a tantrum of spatial energy. The world around Izuku didn't just twist, it shattered. The air itself tore open. A vortex of kaleidoscopic colors and shrieking sound erupted right in front of him. It wasn't a portal, it was a wound in reality. He felt a pull, an impossible, irresistible force that was not gravity, not suction, but something far more fundamental. The rain, the city lights, the shouts of the police, it all smeared into a cacophony of sensory data that his brain couldn't process. He saw a brief, terrifying glimpse of his own apartment building, then a flash of the UA High School gates, then the face of his mother, all swirling in the violent nebula of color. He cried out, but the sound was stolen from his lungs. His body felt like it was being unraveled, thread by thread, and rewoven into something else. The last thing he registered before everything went black was the feeling of his beloved notebook slipping from his numb fingers, falling back into the world he was leaving behind. Pain was the first sensation. A dull, throbbing ache at the back of his skull. Cold was the second. A deep, seeping cold that came from the wet concrete beneath him. Smell was the third. A pungent, foul cocktail of rotting garbage, stagnant water, and something vaguely metallic. Izuku's eyes fluttered open. He was staring at a brick wall, slick with grime and rainwater. Jagged lines of graffiti, in a language he recognized but rarely saw, covered the surface. He pushed himself up, his arms trembling. He was in an alley. A filthy, dark, narrow alley. A villain's quirk. He rasped, his throat raw. He teleported me. He staggered to his feet, using the wall for support. His school uniform was soaked and torn. His backpack was still on, a small miracle, but his notebook was gone. A fresh pang of loss, sharp and painful, cut through his confusion. He stumbled out of the alley's mouth, into the light and noise of a city street. And then he froze. This wasn't Nizurifu. The buildings were different, a forest of steel and glass that climbed higher and with a more aggressive geometry than he was used to. The cars were different, bigger and sleeker, their horns blaring with an unfamiliar, impatient tone. The people were a river of faces, none of them Japanese, speaking a language that his mind, thanks to years of studying international hero news and English classes, could luckily parse. But it was the sounds, the sheer volume of it all, that was overwhelming. A cacophony of sirens, chatter, music, and machinery that was louder, more chaotic, than anything he had ever experienced. Panic, cold and sharp, began to rise in his throat. He was lost. He was completely and utterly lost. He looked for a hero, any hero, a familiar costume, a landmark, anything. But there were none. The skies were empty save for the gray underbelly of clouds. No brightly clad figures leaping between rooftops, no heroes directing traffic or posing for pictures. The world felt mundane. Frighteningly so. He walked aimlessly at first, a ghost in the bustling crowd. People bumped past him, sparing him no more than a fleeting, annoyed glance. He felt invisible, a small, insignificant piece of driftwood in a massive, indifferent ocean. Then he saw it. On the side of a brick building, nestled between a laundromat and a pizza place, was a makeshift shrine. A collection of wilting flowers, half-melted candles, and hand-drawn pictures lay at its base. Dominating the wall above was a mural, expertly painted. It depicted a man in sleek, high-tech armor of red and gold. His faceplate was up, revealing a handsome, goateed man with an expression of intense, weary determination. An arc reactor glowed a faint blue from the center of his chest. Izuku stared, his mind struggling to connect the dots. He knew that face. Tony Stark. A pre-Quark era genius, an arms dealer turned tech magnate, a historical figure, famous for his intellect and controversial legacy. But why was he depicted in a suit of armor? Why were people leaving flowers for him? He read the words scrawled on the signs and cards left at the shrine. Thank you, Tony. Proof that Tony Stark has a heart. You saved us all. Rest in peace, Iron Man. Iron Man? The name meant nothing to him. Saved us all? He backed away, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He saw another memorial a block down, this one larger, more official looking, set up in a small park. It was a bronze statue of the same armored figure, striking a heroic pose. The plaque at its base read, Tony Stark, Avenger, Hero, Father. 1970 to 2023. A world without quirks. A world without all might. But not a world without heroes. In this reality, it seemed, a man with no powers, a quirkless man, had become its greatest symbol. A man who had built his own strength, forged his own legacy from nothing but his own mind. The irony was so profound, so devastatingly cruel, that Izuku felt a hysterical laugh bubble in his chest. He choked it down, leaning against the lamppost, the world spinning around him. He was in another dimension. The realization hit him not like a lightning bolt, but like the slow, crushing pressure of the deep ocean. There was no villain to defeat to get home. There was no hero coming to save him. He was alone, a 15-year-old boy in a foreign world, with no money, no identification, and no power to speak of. The crushing despair he'd felt earlier returned, magnified 1,000-fold. All Might's words came back to him, no longer just a rejection, but a multiversal truth. You can't be a hero. He was useless here, just as he had been at home. He slid down the lamppost, curling into a ball on the wet sidewalk, ignoring the strange looks from passers-by. He was just another piece of urban sorrow, easily ignored. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing himself to wake up, to be back in the familiar reign of Muzurifu. But only the cold, hard reality of New York City remained. Hours passed. The sky bled from gray to a bruised purple, and the city lights began to wage their nightly war against the darkness. Izuku was still huddled on the sidewalk, shivering, a hollow ache in his stomach that was part hunger, part terror. He had to move, had to do something, but his limbs felt leaden, his mind paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of his situation. It was a scream that finally broke through his stupor. It was sharp and terrified, cutting through the dull roar of the city from a nearby side street. Another scream followed, this one angrier, laced with profanity. Izuku's head lifted. His body, once again, acted without his permission. The part of him that was pure, uncut hero instinct, the part that had run towards the sludge villain, pushed him to his feet. He peeked around the corner, his heart hammering against his ribs. The scene was sickeningly familiar, a staple of news reports and crime dramas. A narrow street, poorly lit. Two large men had a young woman cornered against the wall. One of them held a knife, its blade glinting under the dim streetlight. The other was trying to snatch her purse. Just give it to us, lady, and nobody gets hurt. The one with the knife snarled. Please! The woman sobbed, clutching her bag to her chest. Please, just leave me alone. Izuku froze. His mind screamed at him. You're a quirkless Deku. You're nothing. You'll get killed. Run. Hide. Call for help. But who would he call? What would he say? And as he watched, as he saw the genuine terror in the woman's eyes and the cruel sneer on the mother's face, something else took over. A burning, righteous anger. The analytical part of his brain, his only weapon, kicked into high gear, drowning out the fear with a flood of data. Two assailants, both male, estimated height 1.8 meters, 1.9 meters. Assailant 1A1 is armed with a knife, held in his right hand. He's focused on the victim, overconfident. Assailant 2A2 is focused on the purse, displaying tunnel vision. Environment, wet pavement, loose trash cans, pile of discarded newspapers. Potential projectiles, none effective. Potential distractions, high. Victim is panicked, unable to flee. My objective, not to defeat them, but to create an opening for the victim to escape. Direct confrontation is suicide. His eyes darted around, cataloging everything. A metal trash can lid, slightly askew. A puddle of slimy water near one's feet. The street behind them was empty, but he could hear the distant wail of a siren. If he could just buy a few seconds. He took a deep breath. His hands were shaking. This was insane. This was the stupidest thing he had ever done. He remembered All Might's debut video. A disaster scene. Smoke, fire, and a mountain of a man carrying a dozen people on his back, laughing. Why am I smiling? All Might's voiceover had boomed. Because the people need a symbol, someone to see and know that everything is going to be okay. Izuku knew he was no symbol. But maybe, just for a moment, he could be a distraction. He unslung his yellow backpack. It was his shield, his comfort object, the last familiar thing he had in this world. Inside were his textbooks, his pencil case, his half-eaten lunch. It had weight. He didn't shout. He didn't denounce himself. He acted. With a desperate cry that was more air than sound, he sprinted forward. But he didn't run at the men. He ran parallel to them, towards the other side of the street. As he ran, he swung the backpack and hurled it with all his might, not at the muggers, but at a teetering stack of empty metal bins a few feet behind them. The impact was spectacular. A deafening clank crash BM that echoed down the narrow street like a gunshot. Both muggers jumped, spinning around towards the source of the noise. What the hell was that? Atu yelled. It was the opening Izuku needed. In that split second of distraction, he didn't hesitate. He shot forward, his worn sneakers sliding on the wet ground. He didn't go for the men. He went for the environment. He stomped hard on the edge of the metal trash can lid, sending it spinning into the legs of the knife-wielding A1 like a clumsy, oversized discus. The man yelped, stumbling backward as the lid clattered against his shins. His foot landed squarely in the puddle of grimy water. He slipped. His arms flailed, the knife flying from his grasp and skittering across the pavement. Izuku was already past him. He grabbed the terrified woman's arm. Run! He yelled, his voice cracking with adrenaline. Now! The woman, jolted from her fear-induced paralysis, didn't need to be told twice. She scrambled away with him, back towards the main street. Atu, realizing what was happening, turned back, his face contorted in a mask of fury. Get back here, you little... He never finished the sentence. Izuku, still pulling the woman along, blindly kicked backward. His foot connected with a pile of rain-soaked newspapers, sending a wet, pulpy explosion of paper into the man's face. It wasn't an attack, but it was disorienting enough. They burst out onto the main sidewalk, into the light and the relative safety of the crowds. Izuku didn't stop until they were a full block away, gasping for breath under the bright lights of a theater marquee. He let go of the woman's arm, his own body trembling violently as the adrenaline began to crash. His legs felt like jelly. He leaned against the wall, his lungs burning. Oh my God! The woman breathed, clutching her purse to her chest. She was young, maybe college-aged, with wide, grateful eyes. Oh my God, you saved me! They had a knife. You're a hero! The word struck Izuku like a physical blow. A hero. Her. Here. Now. After everything. A raw, painful lump formed in his throat. No! He stammered, shaking his head, unable to meet her gaze. I'm not. I couldn't just stand there. You were so brave. She insisted, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you? Thank you so much. She saw the state of him then, the torn, foreign uniform, the shivering, the lost look in his eyes. Are you okay? Do you need help? Before he could answer, the sound of police sirens grew deafeningly loud, converging on the side street they'd just fled. The woman looked towards the flashing lights, then back at him. I have to go talk to them, she said. Wait here, okay? I'll tell them what you did. But Izuku couldn't wait. The thought of talking to the police, of trying to explain who he was and where he came from, was too terrifying. He was an anomaly, a ghost. He needed to disappear. I have to go, he mumbled, and before she could stop him, He pushed himself off the wall and melted back into the anonymous flow of the New York City crowd, leaving the woman staring after him, a bewildered and grateful expression on her face. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He just walked, his heart a painful, throbbing drum in his chest. He had acted. He had saved someone, and it had cost him the last piece of his old life, his backpack. Now, he truly had nothing. High above the city, in a quiet, sterile server farm in the newly recommissioned Avengers compound upstate, a line of code executed for the first time in 5 months. It wasn't a loud alarm. It was a subtle shift. A single quantum processor, isolated from the main network and powered by its own miniature arc reactor, cross-referenced the data point against a complex, trillion-parameter matrix. The data point was a video file, flagged from a high-resolution Stark Industries security camera hidden discreetly within a street lamp casing in Midtown Manhattan. The footage showed a textbook mugging. The AI had seen millions of similar events. But then it saw the intervention. The AI wasn't just watching. It was analyzing. Subject unknown. Male. East Asian descent. Estimated age, 14 to 16 years. Biometrics. Heart rate elevated to 185 BPM, indicating extreme fear. Cortisol levels critical. Respiration erratic. Action. Intervention in Class 3 criminal assault. Subject is unarmed and physically inferior to assailants. The AI broke down Izuku's actions into pure data. It calculated the trajectory of the backpack throw, labeling it optimal non-lethal auditory distraction. It analyzed the deployment of the trash can lid, environmental manipulation to induce positional instability. It mapped the final escape, noting the newspaper kick, improvised visual obstruction. Then it ran the core analysis, the one its creator had programmed as the highest priority. Query: execute Stark Legacy Contingency Scan. Parameter 1, Heroism Quotient. Defined as propensity for self-sacrificial action in the defense of others. Result: 98.7%. Parameter 2, Intellectual Acuity. Defined as capacity for rapid, non-linear tactical analysis under extreme duress. Result: 96.2%. Parameter 3, Core Motivation. Defined as action driven by altruism versus glory. Result: pure altruism detected. Subject fled scene post-rescue, avoiding recognition. Parameter 4, the Worthiness Clause. A hidden, deeply personal parameter programmed by Tony Stark himself. Defined as the presence of a profound, almost crippling, sense of inadequacy, combined with an unyielding refusal to let that feeling prevent action. A deep-seated belief that one is not good enough, which paradoxically drives one to be better. Scanning. Match detected. Probability, critical. A new protocol activated. A secure, encrypted communication channel opened, one that hadn't been used since the day of Tony Stark's funeral. Harold Happy Hogan rubbed his temples, the dull ache a permanent fixture behind his eyes. He was in the lakehouse study, a sleek, minimalist room that still felt achingly empty. On the tablet in front of him were quarterly reports for Stark Industries, a logistical nightmare of supply chains, R&D budgets, and damage control PR from the blip. Pepper was a titan, but the day-to-day grunt work of keeping Tony's empire from imploding often fell to him. He missed the days when his biggest problem was keeping Tony from flying off to Monaco, or making a scene at a press conference. He missed the man himself with an ache so profound it was a physical presence in the room. Suddenly his tablet went dark. A single, stylized Stark Industries logo appeared on the screen, glowing a soft white. Then, a voice filled the silent room. A voice he hadn't heard in months, a perfect, synthesized blend of JRVIS's polite British cadence and Tony's own wry, familiar tones. Mr. Hogan. Apologies for the intrusion. Happy sat bolt upright, his heart leaping into his throat. FRIDY. No, you're not FRIDY. I am not. I am the Logistical Evaluation and Guidance AI for Contingency and Succession. Codename, Legacy. Activated by Mr. Stark on a Priority 1 directive. Happy stared at the tablet. The Legacy Protocol. He remembered Tony mentioning it once, late at night in the workshop, waving it off as a break glass in case of galactic dictator scenario. A plan to find a successor. He thought it was just another one of Tony's paranoid fantasies. Apparently not. A successor for what? Happy asked, his voice low. For the role, the AI said simply. A candidate has been identified. A wave of feeling washed over Happy, part irritation, part grief, part fierce, protective anger. A replacement for Tony? The idea was obscene. No. Absolutely not. The world doesn't need a new Iron Man. It needs to leave him the hell alone and let him rest in peace. Mr. Stark's parameters were not to find a new Iron Man, the AI corrected gently. His parameters were to find an individual possessing a specific, and exceedingly rare, combination of heroic instinct, analytical genius, and profound moral character. He did not believe power could be inherited. Only responsibility. On the tablet, the video feed from the street corner appeared. Happy watched the scene unfold, the scrawny kid, the muggers, the desperate, clumsy, and shockingly effective intervention. He saw the pure terror on the kid's face, and the unthinking, absolute commitment in his actions. He's a kid, Happy scoffed, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. A scared kid who got lucky. Mr. Stark was also a scared kid in a cave in Afghanistan when he built the Mark I. Legacy countered. Fear is not a disqualifier. It is a prerequisite. Please direct your attention to the object discarded at coordinates 40.7577 degrees north, 73.9857 degrees west. The video feed zoomed in, enhancing an image with impossible clarity. It was the yellow backpack, lying in a heap of trash. Next to it, something had fallen out when Izuku threw it. A notebook. The camera focused on the cover. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. The AI digitally flipped through the pages, showing scan after scan of the interior. Happy leaned closer, his breath catching in his chest. It wasn't just fan art. It was analysis. Incredibly detailed tactical breakdowns of heroes he didn't recognize. Kamui Woods, MT Lady Eraserhead, but the methodology was unmistakable. Weakness analysis, support gear augmentation theories, strategic counters, power output calculations. The pages were a chaotic storm of brilliance, a mirror image of the frantic, genius-level scrawls he used to see on Tony's workshop whiteboards. One page was a detailed critique of an armored hero, analyzing flight stabilizers, weapon energy distribution, and armor composition with a depth that was professional. Frighteningly so. Who is this kid? Happy whispered. Identity unknown, Legacy replied. No matches in any global database. His biometrics, clothing, and the subjects of his analysis suggest he is not from this reality. This makes him a perfect candidate. A blank slate, with no preconceived allegiances or public history. Happy stared at the screen, at the image of the lost, terrified boy with the mind of a tactical genius. A kid who ran towards danger not because he was strong, but because he believed it was the right thing to do. A kid who analyzed heroes with the same obsessive detail as the man who had defined the very concept in this new age. The cynicism in Happy's chest fought a losing battle against the flicker of something else. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The subject is currently 3 blocks from the incident location, displaying signs of hypothermia and distress, Legacy stated. Recommendation: immediate contact and retrieval. Per Mr. Stark's directive, the choice will ultimately be the candidate's. But the offer must be made. Happy sighed, a long, weary sound that carried the weight of the last 5 months. He pushed himself to his feet, grabbing his car keys from the bowl on the table. It was crazy. It was disrespectful. It was probably a huge mistake. But it was also exactly the kind of insane, long-shot, hard-driven thing Tony Stark would have done. All right, Happy said to the empty room, shrugging on his jacket. Send me the location. Let's go see about this, kid. He walked out into the cool night air, heading for his car. In the heart of the city, Izuku Midoriya had found a sheltered bus stop, shivering uncontrollably, his world reduced to a single, desperate thought. I want to go home. He didn't know that home was no longer an option. But a different path, a heavier and more impossible one than he could ever have dreamed, was driving through the rain to find him. The bus stop offered no real shelter. Its plexiglass walls, scarred with graffiti and grime, did little to ward off the biting wind that whipped down the concrete canyon of the New York City Avenue. Rain fell in a fine, persistent mist, clinging to Izuku Midoriya's hair and uniform, leaching away what little warmth he had left. He was shivering, a deep, bone-rattling tremor that was only partly due to the cold. The other part was pure, undiluted terror. He sat on the hard plastic bench, knees drawn to his chest, arms wrapped around them in a futile attempt to make himself smaller, to disappear. His mind, usually a whirlwind of analysis and observation, was a numb, static-filled void. It kept trying to reboot, to process the sheer, crushing impossibility of his situation, but it would inevitably short-circuit. Another dimension. Another world. The phrase was a loop of nonsense. It was the stuff of comic books and sci-fi movies, not the reality of a quirkless 15-year-old from Yuzurifu. He squeezed his eyes shut, and for a desperate, fleeting moment, he could almost smell the familiar scent of his mother's katsudan, hear the explosive crackle of Kaken's taunts, see the unwavering, heroic smile of All Might. The sensory ghosts were so vivid they were painful, a cruel reminder of the immeasurable distance that now separated him from everything he had ever known. He was alone. No, it was worse than that. He was in error. A cosmic glitch. A piece of data written to the wrong hard drive, with no hope of recovery. The despair he'd felt after All Might's rejection was a shallow puddle compared to this bottomless ocean. At least in his own world, he was a known quantity, a failure, yes, but a recognized one. Here, he didn't even exist. A pair of headlights cut through the gloom, slowing as they approached his pathetic little shelter. Izuku flinched, instinctively tucking his head down. It was a car, a long, sleek, black sedan that purred with an expensive silence that seemed to absorb the sounds of the city around it. It was so out of place on this gritty street corner that it might as well have been a spaceship. It pulled to a stop directly in front of the bus stop, its engine a low, powerful hum. The passenger side door opened. A man unfolded himself from the car, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a sharp, dark suit that probably cost more than his family's rent for a year. His face was etched with weary lines, his dark hair slicked back, and his expression was one of profound, world-weary skepticism. He looked like the kind of person who had seen everything and was impressed by none of it. Analysis, a tiny, resilient part of Izuku's brain whispered, a spark of habit in the darkness. Subject, male, early 50s. Build, heavy-set, former boxer or security professional. Posture, guarded. Demeanor, reluctant authority. Conclusion, he is not here by chance. The man stepped under the meager protection of the bus stop's awning, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the damp concrete. He looked Izuku up and down, a flicker of something, pity? Annoyance, in his eyes. You the kid who played pinball with the trash cans? The man asked, his voice a gravelly baritone. Izuku stared, his mouth suddenly dry. He couldn't form words. He just nodded, a tiny, jerky movement. The man sighed, a sound heavy with resignation. Figured. Look, kid. You're gonna have to come with me. Panic, sharp and electrifying, finally broke through Izuku's stupor. This was it. The police. Or worse. Maybe friends of the muggers. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't do anything wrong, he stammered, his Japanese accent thick. I was just trying to help. Yeah, I know. I saw, the man said, pinching the bridge of his nose as if fighting off a migraine. Look, I'm not a cop. My name is Happy Hogan. I'm here because my boss has a very weird and complicated will. He gestured with his head towards the open car door. Get in. You're soaked. You'll catch your death. Izuku didn't move. Every instinct screamed at him not to get into a car with a strange man in a strange city in a strange world. Who is your boss? He managed to ask. Happy's face softened for a fraction of a second, a deep, ancient grief passing through his eyes. My boss was Tony Stark. The name echoed the memorials. The hero in the iron suit. Iron Man. This was getting stranger and more terrifying by the second. But what choice did he have? Freeze to death on a bench, or take a chance on the first person who had shown him anything other than complete indifference? With trembling legs he stood. He was so cold and stiff that he nearly stumbled. Happy caught his arm, a surprisingly steadying presence. Easy does it, kid! He guided Izuku to the car, which smelled of rich leather and clean, conditioned air. As Izuku slid into the plush passenger seat, he noticed a small, subtle logo embossed on the dashboard, a stylized S intertwined with an I. Stark Industries. Happy got back in the driver's seat and the car pulled away from the curb, gliding silently into the river of traffic. Izuku stared out the window as the city lights blurred past, a smear of neon and gold. The car was warm, the gentle hum of the engine a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind. Where are we going? Izuku asked, his voice barely a whisper. Upstate, Happy replied, his eyes fixed on the road. To a house on a lake. Someone wants to meet you. The brief, uninformative answer did nothing to soothe Izuku's anxiety. He lapsed into a strained silence, his mind racing. He was being taken to a remote location by an employee of a dead billionaire genius who was apparently this world's greatest hero. None of it made sense. He was a piece of a puzzle he couldn't see, being moved by a hand he couldn't identify. The journey was long. The towering skyscrapers of Manhattan gradually gave way to the sprawling suburbs, and then to dark, winding country roads flanked by dense forests. The world outside the car became a black void, punctuated only by the sweep of the headlights. The isolation was profound. If they were taking him somewhere to hurt him, no one would ever hear him scream. He must have dozed off, lulled by the warmth and the smooth motion of the car, because he was startled awake when Happy spoke again. We're here, Izuku blinked, pushing himself upright. They had turned onto a private gravel driveway that led towards a large, modern house nestled by the edge of a vast, placid lake. It was all clean lines, dark wood, and enormous glass windows that glowed with a warm, inviting light. It looked less like a house and more like a piece of art seamlessly integrated with nature. It was beautiful, peaceful, and utterly intimidating. Happy parked the car and killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. Come on, he said, his voice softer now. She's waiting. They walked up a stone path to the front door. Before Happy could ring the bell, the door swung open. A woman stood in the doorway, tall and elegant, with strawberry blonde hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. She wore simple, comfortable-looking clothes, but carried herself with an unmistakable aura of power and intelligence. Her face was kind, but her blue eyes were sharp and discerning, and they held a deep, lingering sadness. This was a woman who had weathered storms Izuku couldn't possibly imagine. Happy, she said, her voice calm and clear. You found him. Pepper, this is the kid, Happy said, gesturing awkwardly at Izuku. Kid, this is Pepper Potts. Pepper Potts. The name from the news articles. CEO of Stark Industries. Tony Stark's wife. Izuku felt a fresh wave of vertigo. He was standing on the doorstep of the widow of this world's greatest hero. He felt like a stray dog that had wandered into a palace. He bowed instinctively, a deep, respectful 90-degree angle. It is an honor to meet you, Potts-san, he stuttered. I am so sorry for the intrusion. Pepper's lips twitched in a small, tired smile. It's all right, she said gently. Please come in. You're shivering. She led them inside. The interior of the house was just as breathtaking as the outside, open plan, with a massive stone fireplace, comfortable-looking furniture, and personal touches everywhere. Framed photos sat on shelves, Tony Stark with the woman Pepper, Stark with other people in strange costumes, the Avengers, Izuku's mind supplied, a picture of Stark holding a little girl. It was a home, not a museum, and that made Izuku feel even more out of place. Mommy? Is that Mr. Happy? A small voice called out. A little girl, no older than 5, with her father's curious brown eyes and a head of messy brown hair, came running into the room. She was wearing Iron Man-themed pajamas. She skidded to a halt when she saw Izuku, her eyes wide with curiosity. Who's that? She asked, pointing a small finger at him. This is a guest, sweetheart, Pepper said, her hand resting gently on the girl's head. Morgan, this is Izuku. Your hair is like a forest, Morgan declared with the unfiltered honesty of a child. She then looked down at his torn, dirty uniform. You're all yucky. Izuku's face burned with embarrassment. I am sorry, it's okay, Morgan said brightly. She then looked at Happy. Did you bring me cheeseburgers? Happy chuckled, the first genuine moment of warmth Izuku had seen from him. Not this time, Mo. I was on a mission for your dad. The casual mention of her father, of Tony Stark, sent a shiver down Izuku's spine. He felt like a ghost who had stumbled into a seance. Pepper gently guided Morgan towards another room. Why don't you go finish your movie, sweetie? The adults need to talk. Once Morgan was gone, Pepper's expression grew serious again. She turned her full attention to Izuku, her gaze so intense it felt like it could see right through him. Izuku, she began, gesturing for him to sit on a large, comfortable sofa near the fireplace. Happy stood by the mantel, his arms crossed, a silent, imposing guardian. I imagine you have a lot of questions. Izuku could only nod, his throat tight. The man you saw in the memorials, the hero this world called Iron Man, he was my husband, Tony, Pepper said, her voice steady but laced with a profound undercurrent of grief. Tony was a lot of things. A genius, a billionaire, a philanthropist. But he was also paranoid. He always had a plan for everything. And a plan for his plan. She picked up a tablet from the coffee table, its screen dark. He knew the life he led was dangerous. He knew that one day, he might not come home. He couldn't stand the idea of leaving the world unprotected, of his technology falling into the wrong hands. So he created a contingency. A very secret, very powerful one. He called it the Legacy Protocol. Izuku listened, rapt, his fear momentarily overshadowed by intense curiosity. It's not a weapon or a bank account, Pepper continued. It's an artificial intelligence. A ghost in the machine, so to speak. Tony programmed it with a single, impossible directive. If he died, it was to scan the entire world and find a successor. Not someone to inherit his money or his company, but someone worthy of inheriting the responsibility. Her eyes met Izuku's. The AI doesn't search for power or wealth or influence. Tony believed those things corrupt. It searches for character, for a specific set of traits he believed were essential to being a true hero, unparalleled heroism, which he defined as the instinct to act for others even at great personal risk. Analytical genius, a tendency towards self-sacrifice. And above all, a pure, unyielding drive to help people, not for fame, but because it's the right thing to do. The pieces began to click into place in Izuku's mind, forming a picture so terrifying and absurd that he wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. His intervention in the mugging. His notebooks. For months the legacy AI has been dormant but watching, Pepper said. It scanned billions of people. It never found a match. Until tonight. In a back alley in Manhattan, she slid the tablet across the coffee table towards him. It flagged your actions. It deemed your intervention perfect. A perfect blend of tactical analysis, environmental manipulation, and selfless risk. It made you a candidate. Izuku stared at her, dumbfounded. A candidate? For what? That's what we need to determine, Pepper said, her voice becoming sharper, a hint of the CEO breaking through the grieving widow. She was protecting her husband's legacy now, and she would not suffer a fool. An act of bravery is one thing. Consistency and intellect are another. Tony wasn't just brave, he was brilliant. The armor was nothing without the mind that built and controlled it. She stood and walked over to a sleek console built into the wall. She tapped a few commands, and the large picture window overlooking the lake shimmered and transformed into a massive, high-definition screen. A holographic projector whirred to life in the center of the room. This is my test, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. An image exploded into life in the middle of the room, a swirling vortex of blue light in the sky above a battle-scarred New York City. Giant, levitating alien creatures that looked like metallic whales swam through the air, flanked by smaller, flying soldiers. It was a war zone, and in the middle of it all were a handful of figures, one with a shield, one with a hammer, a giant green beast, and the man in the red and gold armor. Izuku gasped. He was looking at a real battle. The scale was beyond anything he had ever imagined. The Battle of New York, Pepper said quietly. Watch. And tell me what you see. At first, Izuku was just stunned by the spectacle. But then, his instincts took over. The familiar, frantic muttering began, a nervous habit he couldn't control when his analytical brain was firing on all cylinders. Incredible! Their coordination is reactive, not proactive, he whispered, his eyes darting everywhere. The man with the shield, he's the tactical core. He's not the most powerful, but he's directing their movements, using his shield not just for defense, but for ricochet shots to cover his teammates' flanks. The blonde man with the hammer, incredible power output, but he's fighting like a brawler, not a soldier. He leaves himself open after every major strike. The archer, his positioning is key. He's always at the highest point, providing overwatch and identifying priority targets. He's the team's eyes. The green one, pure, uncontrollable force. A liability and an asset. The key is to direct his rage, not contain it. He was lost in it, completely unaware that Pepper and Happy were staring at him, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. He had forgotten where he was, who he was with. He was simply a mind at work. Pepper switched the scene. Now it was an airport. The heroes were fighting each other. A schism, Izuku breathed. Ideological conflict. Captain America's team is using guerrilla tactics, focused on disabling and escaping. Iron Man's team is focused on containment. Their gear is superior, but their objective is more complex. It's harder to catch someone than it is to run away. His eyes locked onto the Iron Man suit. His suit, the Mark 46. It's a masterpiece of modular design, but the power distribution is being pushed to its limit. He's running his non-essential systems, life support, tactical HUD, on a secondary power source to dedicate the main arc reactor to weapons and flight. But see there? He pointed a trembling finger at the hologram. When he uses the uni-beam and the repulsors simultaneously, there's a microsecond of power fluctuation in the flight stabilizers. It's a tiny vulnerability. Under enough stress, a targeted strike to the knee or elbow joint during that fluctuation could temporarily cripple the limb's motor functions. Happy's jaw was practically on the floor. He looked at Pepper, who had gone pale. The vulnerability Izuku had just described was a real one, something Tony had spent weeks fixing after the battle, complaining about it in obsessive detail in his workshop. It was a flaw only the suit's designer, or someone with a mind terrifyingly like his, could possibly have identified from simple observation. Show me his first suit, Izuku requested, his voice now confident, the mutter replaced by a focused intensity. The one from the cave. Pepper, looking slightly dazed, complied. An image of the bulky, crude Mark I appeared, wreathed in fire. Izuku stared at it in silent awe for a long moment. He built this from scraps. In a cave. With a box of nails, he murmured, his voice thick with reverence. It's not a suit, it's a declaration of defiance. The asymmetrical design isn't a flaw, it's a necessity based on available materials. The flamethrowers are crude but effective for area denial. The raw power. He wasn't just building a weapon, he was building a chance. A way to get up when the world had beaten him to the ground. He was quirkless. Like me. And he turned his mind into a superpower. The last sentence hung in the air, heavy and profound. He finally looked away from the hologram, his face flushed, realizing he had been rambling like a maniac in front of these powerful, important people. He shrank back into the couch, his face burning with shame. I'm sorry, he whispered, mortified. I do that sometimes. It's a stupid habit. I'll be quiet. Pepper didn't scold him. She didn't say anything. She simply stared at him, her cautious, calculating expression gone, replaced by one of profound, sorrowful understanding. In this strange, trembling, brilliant boy from another world, she saw a faint, unmistakable echo of her husband. Not his swagger or his ego, but the raw, unshielded core of him, the frantic, problem-solving mind that could not rest, the heart that felt the weight of the world, the insecurity that drove him to build walls of iron around himself. The tablet on the coffee table lit up, and the voice returned to the room, filling the stunned silence. It was calm, measured, and final. The ghost in the machine was rendering its verdict. Analysis of candidate's cognitive test complete, the synthesized voice of Legacy announced. Performance exceeds 97% of all projected best-case scenarios. The candidate has successfully identified 7 critical design flaws and proposed 3 viable support gear upgrades that Mr. Stark himself had theorized but never implemented. The AI paused for a beat, as if for dramatic effect. Candidate Izuku Midoriya. Probability of fulfilling the hero mandate, 97.4%. Unworthiness complex detected. Analysis: this complex is not a disqualifier. It is a key component of the worthiness clause. Recommendation: proceed to workshop phase. Izuku's head shot up. The words hit him like a physical force, knocking the air from his lungs. It was real. This was all real. They were offering him everything he had ever dreamed of, on a scale he could never have conceived. And it felt like a death sentence. The ecstatic, hero-worshipping child inside him screamed with joy. The broken, beaten-down realist that his life had created screamed in terror. The terror won. No, he whispered, shaking his head frantically. No, it's a mistake. You don't understand. The AI is wrong. He looked from Pepper's pitying eyes to Happy's stunned face, his voice rising with panic. I'm not a hero. I'm not a genius. I'm just a nerd who writes in his notebooks because it's the only thing I'm good at. I can't do this. I can't be him. He stood up, backing away from them, from the glowing hologram, from the impossible weight of their expectations. He felt small and fragile and utterly, completely fraudulent. But I'm quirkless, he said, the words tearing from his throat, the oldest and deepest wound of his soul laid bare in this strange, quiet room. I'm a nobody. The silence that followed Izuku's frantic, desperate confession was a heavy, suffocating blanket. In the vast, open-plan living room of the lakehouse, his final words, I'm quirkless. I'm a nobody, seemed to hang in the air, echoing off the high wooden ceilings and glass walls. He stood there, trembling, his fists clenched at his sides, his shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. He had laid his soul bare, offering up the single, shameful truth that had defined his entire existence. He waited for the inevitable dismissal, the pitying nod, the confirmation that this had all been some colossal, cruel mistake. Pepper Potts did not dismiss him. She simply watched him, her expression unreadable but devoid of the scorn he anticipated. It was Happy Hogan who finally broke the silence, taking a half-step forward, his brow furrowed not with anger, but with a raw, genuine confusion. Quirkless? Happy repeated, the word foreign and clumsy on his tongue. What does that even mean? Izuku stared at him, bewildered. It means I don't have a quirk. A superpower. An ability. It means I'm normal. In his world, that single word was a condemnation, a synonym for powerless, for useless. Here, it was met with a blank stare. Kid, Happy said, a note of exasperation creeping into his voice. Neither did Tony. Neither do I. Neither does Pepper. Out of the 6 original Avengers, 4 of them were just people, exceptionally brave, skilled, and stubborn people, but people nonetheless. What's your point? The simple, logical statement was so contrary to every social and personal hierarchy Izuku had ever known that it momentarily broke his brain. He blinked, his mind struggling to process a reality where the lack of an innate superpower wasn't a fundamental deficiency. In Mizudafu, the first question anyone asked a child was, what's your quirk? It defined your potential, your career, your social standing. It defined you. To these people, it was a non sequitur. But a hero has to have power, Izuku insisted, clinging to the foundational belief of his world. All Might said. He trailed off, the memory of his idol's tired face still a fresh wound. Tony Stark's only superpower was his own mind, Pepper said, her voice cutting through his confusion with quiet authority. She took a step towards him, her presence calming, not threatening. He built his power. He forged it in a dark place, from a box of scraps, because he refused to lie down and die. He proved that a hero isn't born from a freak accident, or a genetic lottery. A hero is built, from courage, from sacrifice, and from a hell of a lot of hard work. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the fine lines of grief and exhaustion around her eyes. The AI didn't choose you because it thinks you can lift a car or shoot lasers from your eyes, Izuku. It chose you because when it looked inside your head during that test, it saw a blueprint. It saw the same kind of mind that built the first arc reactor. And when it watched you in that alley, it saw a heart that was willing to risk everything for a stranger. Her gaze was unwavering. We're not asking you to be Tony. No one could be. We're offering you a chance to see if you can be you, with the resources Tony left behind. The decision is yours. No one will force you. But the legacy protocol was Tony's final wish. I intend to see it through. The workshop is ready if you are. The workshop. The word itself was a sacred text, a hallowed ground. The place where Iron Man was born. The idea of him, Izuku Midoriya, a quirkless Deku, setting foot in that space was both a blasphemy and the most intoxicating dream he could imagine. His fear was a raging sea, but beneath it, a tiny, resilient island of hope was refusing to be submerged. The part of him that had scribbled in notebooks for years, that had dreamed of support gear and heroic debuts, was screaming, "This is it. This is your chance. The one you never thought you'd get." He took a shaky breath, the cold air of the room filling his lungs. He looked at Pepper's earnest, waiting face. He looked at Happy's skeptical but patient expression. He thought of his own reflection in the store windows of Muzurifu, a small, pathetic figure with nothing to offer. And then he thought of the man in the iron suit, a man who, by all accounts, should have been just as powerless, but who had refused to accept it. "Okay," Izuku whispered, the word barely audible. But it was enough. I'll try." The next morning, after a restless night in a guest room that was bigger than his entire apartment back home, Izuku was led by Happy down a hidden elevator in the lakehouse garage. The descent was silent and smooth, a gentle hum that did nothing to calm the frantic thrumming of Izuku's heart. The doors slid open not into a basement, but into a place that Izuku's mind could only process as a cathedral. The workshop. It was vast, a cavern of polished concrete, gleaming chrome, and exposed steel beams. It was a perfect, beautiful fusion of organized chaos and sterile high-tech. On one side stood a row of glass alcoves, each containing an iconic Iron Man suit, lit from below like holy relics. The Mark III, the Mark VII, the suitcase armor, the sleek nanotech Mark L. They stood silent and powerful, ghosts of battles fought and won. On the other side was the creative heart of the space. Workbenches were littered with half-finished projects, circuit boards, and strange, esoteric tools Izuku couldn't begin to identify. Holographic displays hovered in midair, showing complex schematics and lines of code. A collection of ridiculously expensive sports cars, Tony Stark's other passion, were parked in a neat row against the far wall, their polished surfaces reflecting the workshop's lights. And in the center of it all was a circular platform, empty now, where the magic had happened. The air hummed with latent power and smelled faintly of ozone and hot metal. It was a sacred space, and Izuku felt like an intruder, a grubby-fingered child who had wandered into the Sistine Chapel. He stood frozen at the entrance, overwhelmed to the point of paralysis. "Don't just stand there gawking, kid, you'll strain something." Happy's voice grumbled from behind him. "This is it. The candy store." Izuku took a hesitant step inside, his worn sneakers squeaking on the pristine floor. He walked slowly towards the line of armors, his eyes wide with a mixture of reverence and academic curiosity. He wasn't just looking at suits, he was looking at a story, at an evolution of technology and ideology. The progression from the Mark III to the Mark VII shows a clear focus on rapid deployment and combat versatility. He began to mutter, his voice a low, unconscious hum. The shift from standard plating to a gold-titanium alloy for better resistance-to-weight ratio, the integration of more munitions, but the real leap is the nanotech. The Mark L isn't a suit, it's a fluid, a programmable matter system that responds to thought. The energy consumption must be astronomical. How did he stabilize the power distribution without the core going critical? Was it a fractal energy distribution network? Or maybe, he used a Mobius inverted power conduit to create a closed, recursive energy loop. A calm, synthesized voice said, startling Izuku so badly he yelped and jumped back. The voice was Legacy's, emanating from unseen speakers throughout the workshop. The design was inspired by an M.C. Escher print. Of course. Izuku breathed, his eyes lighting up with understanding. It's brilliant. Elegant. It's not just engineering, it's art. Happy watched the exchange with a bemused shake of his head. Great. He's talking to the walls. Just like the old boss. He clapped his hands together, the sound echoing in the large space. All right, kid, lesson 1. Before you can even think about touching one of these. He gestured to the armors. You have to learn how they work. Not just the theory. The nuts and bolts. Izuku's heart sank a little. He had imagined, well, he didn't know what he had imagined. A training montage where he'd immediately suit up. You're not getting a suit, Happy said, as if reading his mind. You're getting a toolbox. He led Izuku to a pristine, empty workbench. On it lay a simple set of digital calipers, a soldering iron, a multimeter, and a single, unadorned gauntlet from an older Iron Man suit, a Mark VI. Izuku's mind supplied instantly. It was disconnected, inert, a heavy piece of metal. This is a repulsor, Happy said, tapping the palm of the gauntlet. Your job is to learn what every single component inside it does. You're going to take it apart, and put it back together again. And again, and again. Until you can do it with your eyes closed. The AI will guide you. My designation is UDME, Mr. Hogan. A different voice chimed in, this one distinctly robotic and a bit clumsy. A simple, one-armed robot on wheels, which had been sitting dormant in a corner, rolled over, its single claw-like hand waving enthusiastically. It looked endearingly antiquated next to the rest of the tech. Happy groaned. Tony, you sentimental bastard! You kept this thing? Mr. Stark insisted I'd be preserved as a monument to his early mistakes. Gyumi chirped. I am also programmed to operate the fire extinguisher. It is my primary function. The robot then aimed its claw at Izuku and sprayed him with a small, unexpected jet of water. Izuku yelped, stumbling back, now even more soaked than before. And that's why. Happy sighed, grabbing a rag and tossing it to Izuku. Legacy, you're on guide duty. DME, you're on smoothie duty. And stay away from the kid. For the next several days, the workshop became Izuku's entire world. He woke before dawn, ate the nutrient-paced smoothies Dyumi would clumsily deliver, and worked until he was ready to collapse from exhaustion. He didn't mind. He was in heaven. He wasn't just learning engineering, he was inhaling it. His analytical mind, so long constrained to notebooks and theory, had finally been given a practical outlet. He absorbed information at a frightening rate. Guided by Legacy's patient, omniscient voice, he learned to read complex schematics, to write basic machine code, to understand the physics of arc reactor technology. He learned the difference between a plasma conduit and a power relay, the precise calibration needed for the repulsor's magnetic lens, the delicate art of micro-soldering a control board. His hands, clumsy and soft at first, quickly became calloused and steady. He learned the feel of the tools, the heft of the components. He took the gauntlet apart, and put it back together dozens of times. The first time took him 6 hours. By the end of the week, he could do it in 20 minutes, his movements fluid and sure. But it was more than just mechanics. It was an intimacy. He was learning the language of Tony Stark's genius. Every design choice, every piece of code, was a window into the mind of his predecessor. He saw the elegant solutions, the brute force workarounds, the flashes of paranoid over-engineering, and the sheer, joyful artistry of it all. He was developing a deep, posthumous respect for the man that went far beyond hero worship. He was beginning to understand the creator. Yet, the shadow of the man was long and suffocating. Every success was tainted by the knowledge that Tony Stark had probably done it faster, better, and with a witty one-liner. The weight of the empty suits staring at him from their alcoves was a constant pressure. He wasn't just learning a skill. He was auditioning for a role he still felt was impossibly, laughably out of his league. The unworthiness complex that Legacy had detected was not a bug. It was his core operating system. One rainy afternoon, about a week into his monastic workshop existence, a new variable was introduced. Izuku was hunched over the workbench, trying to debug a line of code for the gauntlet's targeting system. The holographic code shimmered in front of his face, and he was muttering to himself, completely lost in the problem. Okay, The gyroscopic stabilizer isn't syncing with the targeting matrix. Is it a hardware bottleneck or a software loop? If I reroute the data through an auxiliary processor, it might create a lag, but if I streamline the code, I risk system instability. Maybe if I create a subroutine that prioritizes. Whoa. You're a mutterer too? That's cool. I thought I was the only one. Izuku jumped, yelping and dropping a screwdriver, which clattered loudly on the floor. He spun around to see a teenager, probably a year or two older than him, standing at the workshop entrance. He was lanky, with kind brown eyes, a mop of brown hair, and an easy, slightly awkward smile. He wore a worn Science Pun t-shirt under a thin jacket, and was fiddling with the strap of a backpack. Izuku stared at him, his social anxiety kicking into high gear. He hadn't spoken to anyone his own age since arriving in this world. Hi, the newcomer said, taking a hesitant step into the workshop. Happy let me in. I'm Peter. Peter Parker. The name didn't mean anything to Izuku, but there was an open, friendly energy about him that was disarming. I'm Izuku Midoriya. Izuku managed, bowing slightly out of habit. Peter's eyes widened as he took in the scene, the holographic displays, the armors, the gauntlet on the workbench. His gaze was not one of simple awe, but of keen, intelligent interest. So you're the one, he said, his voice a mix of curiosity and something else, something guarded. The candidate. Izuku flinched at the word. It's a mistake, he mumbled, turning back to his workbench, hoping Peter would just go away. Peter didn't. He walked over, peering at the gauntlet. Mark 6 repulsor assembly. Nice. I always thought the power-to-mass ratio on this model was a little inefficient compared to the Mark 7, but the durability was way better. Less prone to overheating during sustained use. He then glanced at the holographic code. You're getting a recursive error in the targeting handshake protocol. You need to add a null check condition before the primary loop initializes. Otherwise, it'll keep pinging for a target that doesn't exist and eventually crash the system. Izuku stared at the code, then back at Peter, his jaw slack. Peter was right. It was a simple, elegant solution that he had completely overlooked in his frantic search for a more complex one. How did you? Izuku started. Oh, I like to tinker, Peter said, rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. Mr. Stark, he taught me a few things. The mention of Mr. Stark was what did it. The way Peter said it, with a familiar affection laced with a deep, fresh pain, created an instant, unspoken connection. This wasn't just some random kid. This was someone who had known Tony Stark. Someone who was also living in the shadow of his loss. For the first time, a flicker of tension entered the room. Peter's friendly demeanor was still there, but his eyes, as they looked from the gauntlet to Izuku, held a fierce, protective quality. He was sizing Izuku up, and the unspoken question was clear. Who are you to be here, in his place? Happy told me about you, Peter said, his voice a little quieter. He said they think you're going to be the next Iron Man. The statement hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Izuku felt a hot flush of shame and anger at the assumption, at the impossible expectation. I'm not, Izuku said, his voice sharp and defensive. I'm not trying to be him. I could never be him. I'm just learning. Learning what? Peter challenged, his voice still soft but with an edge of steel. How to build his suits. How to fly around and shoot things. Is that what you think being Iron Man was about? No! Izuku retorted, stung by the accusation. It's about the responsibility. It's about using your mind to protect people. It's about getting up when you fall down, no matter how many times it happens. It's about building something better from your own mistakes. He was quoting Pepper now, but the words felt like his own. Peter's hard expression softened slightly. He saw the genuine, passionate conviction in Izuku's eyes. He saw the same desperate desire to do good that churned in his own gut every time he pulled on his mask. He saw another kid buckling under a weight that was too heavy to carry alone. Mr. Stark, he wasn't just my mentor, Peter said, his gaze drifting to the empty central platform. He was everything. After my uncle died, he looked out for me. He gave me a chance. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. His voice cracked. When he died, it felt like the whole world lost its anchor. Like I lost my anchor. Izuku listened, his own defensiveness melting away, replaced by a profound empathy. He knew that feeling. The feeling of looking up to a larger-than-life hero, of structuring your entire world around their existence. All Might. The symbol of peace. He understood the void that is left when that symbol is gone. I had a hero like that too, Izuku said quietly, his gaze distant, thinking of a world away. His name was All Might. He was the #1 hero in my world. The symbol of peace. He could save everyone with a smile. I wanted to be just like him. What happened to him? Peter asked gently. Izuku's expression clouded over. He lost his power. He gave it all up in one last, great fight to save everyone. And before that, he told me that someone like me, someone without a power of my own, could never be a hero. The confession hung between them, a shared secret of inadequacy and hero worship. Peter looked at Izuku, truly looked at him, and saw not a replacement for his mentor, but a kindred spirit. Another nerdy kid who was just trying to do the right thing, burdened by the expectations of giants. He was wrong, Peter said with a quiet certainty that struck Izuku to his core. My friend, a friend of mine once told me that what makes you a hero isn't the power you have, but the choices you make with that power. Or without it. A fragile, tentative truce formed in the quiet of the workshop. The tension dissipated, replaced by a mutual understanding. There were two boys standing in the shadow of Titans, trying to find their own way. So, Peter said, his friendly energy returning, you want to fix that recursive error, or should we just let Dayumi put out the fire when it inevitably shorts out? A small, genuine smile touched Izuku's lips for the first time since he'd arrived in this world. Fix it, he said. They spent the rest of the afternoon working together. Their dynamic was immediate and synergistic. Izuku's meticulous, step-by-step analytical approach was the perfect complement to Peter's intuitive, improvisational genius. Izuku would identify a problem by breaking it down into its smallest components. Peter would find a solution by making a creative leap that Izuku would never have considered. They fixed the code in the gauntlet. Then, for fun, they started tinkering. The repulsor is designed for offense and propulsion, Izuku mused, looking at the device. But the kinetic output could be recalibrated. What if you created a wider lower power field, not to push things away, but to hold them, like a kinetic cushion? Peter's eyes lit up. You could use it to catch falling debris. Or even people, but you need to build a dampening field to absorb the impact, otherwise it would be like getting hit by a wall. Exactly. A dampening field could be generated by reversing the polarity of the secondary energy coils. Izuku explained, already sketching out a schematic on a holographic display. But the power drain would be significant. You'd need a more efficient way to store and discharge the energy. What about a supercapacitor? Peter suggested, pulling up a new schematic. Like the ones used in the new StarTech bullet trains. They can discharge their entire energy store in a nanosecond. If we could build a miniature version. They worked for hours, their conversation a rapid-fire exchange of theories, equations, and excited shouts of, "What if?" Happy looked in on them once, saw the two teenagers hunched over a workbench, surrounded by shimmering holograms and chattering a mile a minute in a language of science he couldn't comprehend, and a sad, fond smile touched his lips. He quietly backed out, leaving them to it. It was the most life the workshop had seen since Tony was alive. By the time the sun had set, they had a working prototype. Not a full suit, not even a full weapon. It was a small, cylindrical device, about the size of a grenade. Okay, plus ultra, run the final diagnostic, Izuku said to the AI, having informally nicknamed his personal terminal after the motto of his old hero school. Designation not recognized. Legacy's voice replied coolly. Running diagnostic on device alpha dot. A moment later it added. All systems nominal. Energy cell at 100%. Probability of successful deployment, 98.9%. Peter grinned. Only one way to find out. They took the device to the workshop's testing range, a reinforced chamber with walls made of a carbon polymer composite. Peter, using his own advanced tech, activated a small, spider-like drone and had it drop a 50-pound block of solid steel from the ceiling. "Ready?" Peter asked. Izuku took a deep breath, his thumb hovering over the activator button on the small device in his hand. "Ready." As the steel block plummeted, Izuku threw the device. It landed on the floor directly underneath the block's path and, a second before impact, discharged with a low thwump. A shimmering, web-like net of blue energy erupted from it, catching the block and enveloping it. The block's momentum was instantly arrested, and it hung suspended in the air, wrapped in a cocoon of what looked like high-tensile capture foam. The foam crackled with energy for a moment before solidifying into a hard, white shell. It had worked. It had worked perfectly. Izuku stared, his heart pounding. Peter let out a whoop of excitement, clapping him on the back. "Dude! That was awesome! A non-lethal, high-impact capture device! That's amazing!" Izuku looked down at his own hands. They were smudged with grease and covered in small nicks and cuts. But they had built something. Something real. Something that could help people. For his entire life, his hands had only been good for taking notes, for analyzing the powers of others. Now, they had created a power of their own. A single tear traced a clean path through the grime on his cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or fear. It was a tear of profound, overwhelming joy. For the first time, he wasn't just imitating a hero or dreaming of being one. He had taken the first, small, tangible step. He had forged a glimmer of hope in the heart of Tony Stark's workshop, and in doing so, had begun to forge something new within himself. The weight of iron still felt heavy, but for the first time, he felt like he might just be strong enough to start lifting it. In the forgotten underbelly of the city, far from the gleaming towers of Manhattan and the quiet dignity of the Avengers compound, rust was a living organism. It crawled over corrugated steel walls, bled in orange streaks down concrete pillars, and coated the skeletons of abandoned machinery. This was the industrial graveyard of Queens, a sprawling necropolis of defunct factories and derelict warehouses where progress had come and gone, leaving behind only decay. And in the heart of this decay, in the cavernous, echoing space of a former locomotive repair depot, Silas Varick was creating his own brand of progress. Silas was a ghost, a man erased from the world by his own bitterness. He had once been a rising star at Stark Industries, a brilliant, if abrasive, engineer in the Advanced Drone Development Division. His vision had been one of perfect, sterile safety. He designed automated systems, unmanned sentinels, and remote-operated drones intended to take the human element, the fragile, fallible, emotional human element, out of conflict entirely. He had believed, with a zealot's conviction, that he was building the future of peacekeeping. Then Iron Man happened. Tony Stark, in his flashy, individualistic suit of armor, had become a global sensation overnight. He was a single man, a personality, a hero. He was everything Silas's philosophy stood for against. Stark represented the cult of personality, the glorification of a single, reckless human making life-or-death decisions. Silas saw it as a step backward, a dangerous regression into romanticized, messy heroism when a cleaner, more logical solution was at hand. His repeated proposals for a fully automated Iron Legion, a fleet of drones controlled by a central, logical AI, were rejected time and time again. Stark had looked at his designs, nodded thoughtfully, and said, "Great work, Silas. But a suit of armor with no one inside is just a coffin." The casual dismissal, the folksy metaphor that so utterly missed the point, had planted a seed of resentment in Silas's soul. The final insult came after the Battle of New York. The world celebrated the Avengers, these flawed, emotional individuals. A few years later, that same recklessness, that same hubris, led to Ultron. And Ultron, a twisted perversion of Silas's own dream, had been the world's justification for shunning his work entirely. He was sidelined, his projects defunded, his genius left to rot in a corporate cubicle while the world fawned over the very cowboys who kept setting the prairie on fire. So he had walked away. He had taken his work, his intellect, and his festering resentment, and disappeared. He became a scavenger, a technological vulture picking at the carrion of the world Stark had created. He hunted scrapyards, hacked into low-level Stark tech disposal manifests, and bribed disgruntled shipping clerks. He collected the broken, the discarded, the obsolete. And here, in his rusted cathedral, he gave them new life. His workshop was a nightmare reflection of Tony Stark's. Where Stark's was clean, bright, and filled with sleek potential, Silas's was dark, grimy, and cluttered with grotesque hybrids of technology. Wires snaked across the floor like metallic entrails. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burning solder. And everywhere there were his children. He called them his parasites. Small, insected drones, no bigger than a man's hand, with multiple spindly legs and a single, glowing optic sensor. They were cobbled together from scavenged parts, old phone processors, drone motors, medical scanner components, all fused into a functional, horrifying whole. Their purpose was simple: to latch onto a piece of technology, drill into its systems with a needle-like data probe, and override its core programming. They were a virus made manifest, a plague of metal and code. Silas Varick, now clad in a grease-stained jumpsuit and wearing a pair of high-tech goggles that fed him a constant stream of data, watched his creation skitter across the concrete floor. He was no longer Silas, the failed engineer. In the shadows of his new world, he had given himself a new name. He was the Technavore, the one who would consume the flawed legacy of Tony Stark and birth a new world of perfect, logical order from its corpse. Phase 1 is complete, he murmured, his voice a dry rasp. He addressed the largest of his creations, a bulky, spider-like drone hanging from the ceiling, its multiple red optics focused on him like an expectant deity. This was his command unit, Weaver. The swarm is viable. The parasitic code is stable. Now we require a more substantial power source. The old arc reactor prototypes from the Westbury disposal facility will suffice for the initial network test. He typed a command into his terminal. On a large, cracked monitor, a satellite map of a Stark Industries cargo train appeared, its route highlighted in green. The world has grown complacent in the wake of its savior's sacrifice, Technavore said to the silence, his voice dripping with scorn. They mourn the man, but they continue to rely on his flawed, vulnerable systems. It's time for a demonstration, time to show them the folly of putting their faith in a single, emotional heart, when a perfectly logical mind is so much more reliable. He smiled, a thin, cruel slash in the gloom. Let's remind them what a real ghost in the machine looks like. Back at the Avengers compound, the atmosphere was one of quiet, cautious optimism. Izuku's breakthrough with the capture foam grenade, which he and Peter had dubbed the Gunade, had been a turning point. It was a small victory, but a significant one. It proved the core concept, that Izuku's mind, combined with Stark's resources, could create something new and valuable. Pepper had authorized the next phase. The workshop phase was officially over. It was time for the simulator. Izuku stood on the central platform in the workshop, clad in a sleek, gray motion capture suit. The world around him was a blank, white grid. But as Happy, observing from a control console, initiated the program, the grid dissolved, replaced by a stunningly realistic simulation of downtown Manhattan. "All right, kid. Welcome to the cockpit," Happy's voice said through his headset. "Legacy is patched into the simulation. It will be your flight instructor. We're starting you off with a stripped-down, virtual model of the Mark II. No weapons, basic propulsion. The goal here is simple. Learn to fly without redecorating Times Square." Izuku took a deep, shuddering breath. He could feel the phantom weight of the armor around him. A heads-up display, a shimmering cascade of blue data, flickered to life in his vision. Altimeter, power levels, velocity indicators. It was overwhelming. "Flight systems engaged," Legacy's voice said in his ear, calm and steady. "Repulsor output is at 10%. To initiate vertical thrust, modulate power through your palm and boot emitters in unison. I recommend a gradual increase." Izuku held out his hands palms down, just as he had seen Iron Man do 1,000 times in videos. He focused, willing the power to flow. The simulated sound of a repulsor charging filled his ears. He pushed a little harder. His feet lifted an inch off the ground. A giddy, exhilarating laugh escaped his lips. He was flying. Well, hovering. He pushed a little more. He rose a foot. Then 2. Then 10. He was unstable, wobbling like a newborn fawn, but he was airborne. "Okay, now forward momentum," Happy coached. Tilt your hands back, angle your body. Easy does it. Izuku tried to follow the instructions, but his movements were clumsy, jerky. He tilted too far, and the simulated suit shot forward like a cannonball, a strangled scream tearing from his throat. The skyscrapers of Manhattan rushed towards him at a terrifying speed. Correction required, Izuku, Legacy said, its tone unnervingly calm. Suggest deploying dorsal air flaps and reversing repulsor polarity for braking. How? Izuku shrieked, fumbling with phantom controls. He flailed, overcorrecting, and sent the virtual suit into a wild, uncontrolled spin. The world became a nauseating blur of gray and blue. He slammed into the side of a virtual skyscraper with a bone-jarring crunch that felt terrifyingly real, thanks to the haptic feedback of his suit. An angry red warning flashed in his HUD, hull integrity, 74%. Okay, Happy said after a moment of stunned silence. Maybe less like a cannonball, more like a gentle leaf on the wind. The next few hours were a masterclass in humiliation. Izuku crashed into buildings, pancaked onto sidewalks, and spun out of control more times than he could count. His analytical mind, so brilliant at observing and deconstructing the actions of others, struggled to translate theory into kinesthetic practice. He understood the physics of flight perfectly, but understanding and doing were two very different things. He was clumsy, uncoordinated, and his instincts were all wrong. He was fighting the suit instead of working with it. You're thinking too much, Happy finally said, his voice laced with a weary sympathy. You're trying to calculate every variable. Tony never flew like that. He just felt it. It was an extension of him. You need to stop trying to be a pilot and just be the suit. Frustrated and disheartened, Izuku ended the simulation. He slumped onto the edge of the platform, burying his face in his hands. The elation from creating the grenade had evaporated, replaced by the familiar, bitter taste of failure. He could build the tech, but he couldn't use it. It was another cruel joke. He was a brilliant mechanic for a car he didn't have the coordination to drive. It was in this moment of self-pity that the alert came. A loud, insistent siren blared through the workshop, a sound Izuku had never heard before. Red lights began to flash, sweeping across the rows of silent armors. What is that? Izuku asked, scrambling to his feet. Happy was already at the main console, his face grim. It's a Priority 1 alert. An attack on a Stark Industries asset. A map appeared on the main holographic display, showing the cargo train that Silas Varick had targeted. Live video footage, transmitted from a security drone, flickered onto the screen. It showed chaos. Small, insect-like machines were swarming over the train cars, their metallic legs scuttling over the surfaces. They were tearing open panels, their single red eyes glowing with malevolent light. The train's automated defense turrets, designed to ward off thieves, were either disabled or, in a horrifying twist, were firing on the train's own security personnel. What are those things? Izuku breathed, his eyes wide with horror and analytical fascination. They're overriding the systems. It's like a computer virus, but physical. Happy. Pepper's voice came over the intercom, sharp and urgent. That train is carrying decommissioned arc reactor prototypes. They're being transported for safe disposal. They're shielded, but if those things manage to breach the containment cars, the resulting energy discharge could level a square mile. The local authorities are 10 minutes out, and they're not equipped to handle this. Happy growled, his hands flying across the console. Peter's on a school trip in D.C. He's too far away. His eyes darted around the workshop, a desperate, hunted look on his face. He looked at the row of advanced, powerful Iron Man suits. Then he looked at Izuku. Izuku's blood ran cold. He knew what Happy was thinking. No, Izuku said, shaking his head. Happy, no. I can't. I just spent 3 hours crashing into fake buildings. I'm not ready. I know you're not ready. Happy snapped, his fear and frustration boiling over. You think Tony was ready when he put on that tin can in Afghanistan? There's no time to be ready. There are people on that train, kid. And a bomb big enough to wipe a small town off the map is about to go off. Happy's words were a slap in the face. People were in danger. The cold, hard reality of the situation crashed down on Izuku, overriding his fear. This wasn't a simulation. This wasn't a test. This was real. His failures in the simulator didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was stopping those things and saving those people. What can I use? Izuku asked, his voice shaking but firm. Happy's gaze fell on a single, isolated alcove at the end of the main row. It contained a suit that was starkly different from the others. It was gunmetal gray, bulky, and covered in exposed rivets and wiring. It was beautiful in its raw, unpolished functionality. The Mark II, Happy said. The original prototype. Tony kept it for sentimental reasons. It's been updated with a modern arc reactor and a basic flight system, but there are no advanced weapons, no unibeam, no missiles. Just the repulsors. It's the only one simple enough that you might be able to handle it without killing yourself. He looked Izuku dead in the eye. It's a flying tank, kid. It's clumsy, it's heavy, but it's tough. Can you do it? Izuku looked at the Mark II. It wasn't a sleek symbol of hope like the later models. It was a statement of pure, stubborn defiance. It was the suit of a man who was building his way out of a hopeless situation. It was a kindred spirit. He took a deep breath and nodded. I can do it. The suiting up process was a blur of mechanical arms and whirring servos. Izuku stood on the central platform as the bulky, heavy pieces of the Mark II locked into place around him with a series of loud, satisfying CLUNKs. The final piece, the helmet, lowered over his head, and the world was replaced by the familiar blue glow of the heads-up display. But this time, it wasn't a simulation. The weight of the suit was real, a crushing, powerful presence. He felt less like a hero and more like a sarcophagus. Welcome, Izuku, Legacy's voice said in his helmet. It was a comforting, familiar presence in the terrifying new reality. I have uploaded the mission parameters to your HUD. Your primary objective is to secure the arc reactor prototypes. Secondary objective is the preservation of civilian life. Engaging in combat is not recommended. Easy for you to say, Izuku muttered, his heart trying to beat its way out of his ribcage. The roof of the workshop split open, revealing the gray, overcast sky. All right, kid. Happy's voice crackled in his ear. Like we practiced. Gentle leaf on the wind. Izuku closed his eyes for a second, picturing the movements from the simulator. He angled his hands and feet, and with a surge of terror and adrenaline, pushed power to the repulsors. The takeoff was anything but gentle. With a roar of unleashed energy that was deafeningly real, the Mark II shot upwards like an unguided missile. Izuku screamed, a high-pitched, terrified sound that was mercifully contained within his helmet. He was a passenger in a runaway metal body. He wrestled with the controls, remembering Legacy's advice from the simulation. He deployed the air flaps, the sudden drag wrenching the suit into a more stable, if wobbly, flight path. He was flying. For real. The wind screamed past his helmet, the landscape of upstate New York spread out beneath him like a map. It was terrifying. And it was the most incredible thing he had ever experienced. Course correction required, Legacy advised calmly. Target is 17.4 degrees to your port side. Suggest banking turn. Following the AI's guidance, Izuku managed to angle the suit in the right direction. He was flying. It was clumsy, ugly, and profoundly inefficient, but he was moving towards the target. He arrived at the scene of the attack minutes later. The cargo train was stalled on a long, elevated stretch of track that cut through a dense forest. From the air, it looked like a wounded metal snake being devoured by a swarm of metallic insects. He could see the small figures of the security guards pinned down behind a derailed car, a few of the automated turrets still firing erratically in their direction. Okay, Legacy, Izuku said, his voice shaking. Scan those things. Tell me what I'm looking at. Scanning, the AI replied. Subjects are parasitic drones. They are networked, sharing processing power. They appear to be overriding system controls via direct data spike. There is a single, larger drone on top of the primary containment car. It appears to be functioning as the command unit, the Alpha drone. Just like in Peter's team-up scenario from their brainstorming session. Take out the leader, and the swarm might fall. Okay. I have to get to that command drone, Izuku decided. Happy, are you seeing this? Loud and clear, kid. Happy's voice crackled. Looks like you're the exterminator. Be careful. Izuku descended, his landing less a graceful touchdown and more a controlled crash. He hit the roof of a passenger car with a deafening boom of metal on metal, denting the roof and stumbling to one knee. The sheer, unyielding weight of the suit was immense. Just standing up was a workout. The moment he landed, the swarm reacted. A dozen of the parasitic drones detached from the train and scurried towards him, their single red eyes locking onto his position. Non-combat is no longer an option, it seems, Izuku muttered grimly. He raised a gauntlet, just as he had in the workshop, and fired a repulsor blast. It was far more powerful than he expected. The blast of kinetic energy tore a chunk of the roof off and sent 3 of the drones flying into the forest. But more were coming. He was clumsy, slow. The Mark II was a tank, not a fighter jet. He lumbered along the top of the train, firing wild repulsor blasts. He managed to destroy a few drones, but for every one he hit, 2 more would skitter out of the way. They were fast, agile, and swarming him. One leaped onto his leg, its needle-like probe attempting to drill into his armor. He swatted it away with a metallic clang. This wasn't working. He was too slow to fight them all. He had to get to the command drone. He poured power into his boot jets, launching himself into a low, clumsy flight down the length of the train. The drones gave chase, a cloud of angry, metallic wasps. He ignored them, focusing on the alpha drone that Legacy had highlighted in his HUD. It was larger, bulkier, and was working on the main locking mechanism of the arc reactor car. He landed hard on the containment car, the impact shaking the entire structure. The command drone, Weaver, detached its probe and turned its multiple red optics to face him. A synthesized voice, distorted and menacing, emanated from its chassis. An unexpected variable. It rasped. It was Technavore's voice, broadcast through his creation. Stark's ghost. A child in a tin can. You are not part of the equation. I'm here to stop you. Izuku yelled, his voice sounding thin and reedy even to himself. You cannot stop progress. Technavore's voice sneered. You are merely a relic, a symbol of a flawed, sentimental past. The future is control. The future is logic. The future is me. The Weaver drone lunged. It was much faster and stronger than the smaller parasites. It slammed into Izuku, its metallic claws screeching against his armor. The raw, physical force of the blows sent him stumbling backward. He fired a repulsor blast, but Weaver deflected it with an armored plate, the energy dissipating harmlessly. Izuku was outmatched. The drone was designed for combat. His suit was an antique. He was a novice pilot in a flying brick, fighting a dedicated killing machine. Weaver's claws tore at his armor, leaving deep gouges in the metal. Warning lights flashed all over his HUD. Armor breach imminent. Power fluctuations detected. He was failing. The security guards were still pinned down. The containment car was still under threat. And he, the so-called successor, was getting torn to pieces in his first real fight. The taunts of his childhood, Kaken's sneering face, All Might's pitying eyes, they all flooded his mind. Useless. Quirkless. Deku, you see? Technavore's voice echoed in his helmet as Weaver pinned him against the side of the train. You are nothing. Just a boy pretending to be a man. A pale, pathetic imitation of a reckless fool. Your heart, your emotion, it is a weakness. I will burn it out of this world. Weaver's probe, much larger and more wicked than the others, extended from its chassis, aiming for a weak point in Izuku's chest plate, right where the arc reactor was housed. Desperation fueled him. Izuku roared, a primal sound of fear and defiance. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a genius. But he was stubborn. He brought both of his hands up, grabbing the Weaver drone. He poured every ounce of power he had left into his boot jets, pushing off the side of the train and launching both himself and the drone into the air. They tumbled through the sky, a chaotic mess of grappling metal. Izuku knew he couldn't win a direct fight. He had to be smarter. He had to use the one thing he had, his analytical mind. Legacy! He yelled. The drone, it's broadcasting its master's voice. Find the source of the transmission. Triangulate it. Triangulating. Signal is heavily encrypted and bounced through multiple proxies. But the carrier wave has a unique, unstable signature. I can trace it. That was all he needed. A way to fight back later. But first, he had to survive now. He twisted in midair, putting all his weight and the suit's momentum into a downward plummet. He was aiming for the dense forest below. Weaver, caught off guard by the sudden maneuver, screeched electronically, trying to disengage. But Izuku held on, his gauntlets clamped onto its chassis like a vice. They crashed into the forest canopy with the force of a meteor. Trees splintered, branches snapped, and they slammed into the soft, wet earth in a shower of dirt and leaves. The impact was brutal. Izuku's head rattled inside his helmet, his vision swimming with static. Multiple system failures. His HUD screamed in angry red letters. He pushed the wrecked drone off him. It was damaged, its optics flickering, but it was still functional. Technavore had escaped. The mission was a failure. He managed to get the suit to its feet, stumbling through the trees back towards the train. The remaining parasitic drones, their command unit gone, were now confused, skittering aimlessly before their power cells died. The threat was over, but not because of him. He had just managed to survive. He saw the security guards cautiously emerging, the local police finally arriving. He had saved them, he supposed, but it didn't feel like a victory. He felt like a fraud. He had been clumsy, terrified, and had ultimately won through a clumsy, desperate tackle, not through skill or heroism. He engaged his repulsors, the suit groaning in protest, and began the slow, humiliating flight back to the compound. The Mark II was dented, gouged, and sparking. He was left shaken, his ears ringing with the villain's mocking words. A child in a tin can. He had faced his first villain. And while he had survived, he had a sinking, sickening feeling that the villain had won. The shadow of the Technavore was now cast over him, and Izuku Midoriya had never felt more unworthy of the light. The flight back to the compound was a silent, agonizing journey of shame. The Mark II, once a symbol of defiance and potential, now felt like a coffin of failure. It groaned and hissed with every movement, its battered frame a testament to Izuku's inadequacy. Warning lights flickered across his HUD like mocking, angry eyes, each one a notification of a system he had failed to protect, a maneuver he had failed to execute. The wind whistling through a new crack near his helmet's visor was a constant, high-pitched reminder of how close he had come to disaster. He landed back in the workshop not with the controlled grace of a hero, but with the clattering, undignified collapse of a broken machine. The suit's power systems finally gave out, and he crumpled to one knee on the central platform, the metal groaning in protest. The automated arms of the gantry, meant for a smooth and seamless desuiting process, struggled to find their connection points on the damaged armor. With a final, shuddering hiss, the faceplate retracted, revealing Izuku's face to the cavernous, silent workshop. He was pale, his face streaked with sweat and grime. His eyes, usually bright with either nervous energy or intellectual fire, were wide and haunted, locked in a 1,000-yard stare that saw only his own failure replaying on an endless loop. He didn't see Happy Hogan rushing to his side, his face a mask of worry. He didn't see Pepper Potts observing from the upper balcony, her expression tense and anxious. He only heard the voice of the Technavore, a venomous whisper that had burrowed deep into his soul. A child in a tin can, a pale, pathetic imitation, your heart, your emotion, it is a weakness. And worse, much worse, he heard the echoes of his past, the ghosts of Muzurifu rising to join the chorus of his self-doubt. You're a useless Deku. Kaken's voice sneered, the memory as sharp and painful as if he were standing right there, palms crackling with explosive power. You're worse than worthless. You're a quirkless wannabe who'll never amount to anything. Then came the voice of his idol, the one that cut the deepest, filled not with malice but with a soul-crushing pity. I'm sorry, kid, but no. You can't become a hero without a quirk. You have to be realistic. The mechanical arms finally pulled the last piece of the chest plate away, and Izuku stumbled forward, free from the weight of the iron but not from the weight of his failure. He sank to the floor, curling in on himself, his whole body trembling with a violent, uncontrollable tremor that had nothing to do with the adrenaline crash. It was the shaking of a foundation that had been utterly shattered. Izuku! Happy's voice finally broke through the noise in his head. He knelt beside him, placing a hesitant hand on his shoulder. "Kid, are you okay? Are you hurt?" Izuku didn't answer. He couldn't. He just shook his head, a small, pathetic gesture. He wasn't physically injured, but he felt broken in a way that was far more profound. He had been given the dream. He had been given the tools, the trust, the opportunity of 1,000 lifetimes. And on his very first outing, he had proven what he had known all along. He wasn't worthy. "The mission was a success, Izuku," Pepper's calm voice said as she descended the stairs and approached him. "The authorities secured the train. The prototypes are safe. No one was seriously injured. You did what you had to do." "I didn't do anything," Izuku whispered, his voice raw and hoarse. He hugged his knees tighter, unable to look at her. He couldn't bear to see the disappointment in her eyes. "I failed. I was clumsy, I was scared. I didn't beat him. I just fell on him. I didn't win. He just left." He looked up at them, his eyes swimming with unshed tears of frustration and shame. He was right. "I'm just a kid pretending to be something I'm not. I'm not Iron Man. I'm just Deku." He said the name not with the defiant reclamation he had once felt, but with the full, original weight of its intended meaning: useless, good for nothing. Happy and Pepper exchanged a look over his head, a silent conversation passing between them. Happy's was one of helpless frustration, Pepper's was one of deep, sorrowful empathy. She had seen this before. Not this exact brand of frantic, self-flagellating despair, but the core of it. She had seen it in Tony. She had seen it after he'd returned from Afghanistan, a changed man haunted by the cave and the bomb. She had seen it after the Battle of New York, when he couldn't sleep, consumed by the terror of what he had seen in that wormhole. And she had seen it in its purest, most destructive form after Ultron, when his own desire to protect the world had nearly led to its annihilation. The crushing, suffocating weight of failure was the price of the armor. It was a burden every hero had to learn to carry. She dismissed Happy with a subtle nod. He hesitated, then reluctantly stood and retreated, leaving her alone with the broken boy. She didn't sit next to him or crowd him. Instead, she walked over to the battered Mark II, which now stood limply on the gantry, its gray armor scarred and gouged. She ran a hand over a deep scratch on its helmet, her touch gentle, reverent. "This suit," she began, her voice soft but clear, echoing slightly in the quiet workshop. "The first time Tony put it on, he didn't fly. He shot up, slammed into a wall, and fell flat on his face, broke half the things in his first workshop. The second time, he flew so high he nearly froze to death because he forgot to account for the temperature drop at high altitudes. A basic design flaw that almost killed him." Izuku looked up, his tear-filled eyes watching her. "The Jericho missile," she continued, her gaze distant, lost in memory. "It was his masterpiece. The pinnacle of Stark Industries' weaponry. He presented it with such pride, such swagger. Weeks later, he found out it was being used by terrorists to kill innocent people, to kill the very soldiers it was meant to protect. He saw his own name, his legacy, written on the side of the weapon that nearly killed him. He carried that failure with him every single day." She turned from the suit to face him, her expression soft but unyielding. "And then there was Ultron. His grand vision. A suit of armor around the world, a way to protect everyone, so he wouldn't have to carry the burden alone. He poured everything into it. And it turned into a monster, a genocidal maniac that killed thousands and almost dropped a city from the sky. The entire world saw his greatest failure broadcast on every screen. They called him a monster, a merchant of death all over again." She walked over and finally knelt in front of Izuku, forcing him to meet her gaze. Her eyes were not filled with disappointment. They were filled with a fierce, profound understanding. "Do you think any of those failures made him less of a hero?" she asked, her voice dropping to an intense whisper. "Do you think being clumsy, or being scared, or making a catastrophic mistake means you don't deserve to try?" She reached out and gently tilted his chin up. "Being Iron Man, Izuku, was never about being perfect. It was never about winning every fight, or never being afraid. It was about one thing and one thing only." Her voice grew stronger, imbued with the conviction of a woman who had stood by her husband through every triumph and every disaster. It's about getting back up. It's about looking at the wreckage of your mistakes, the pieces of your failure, and having the courage to say, okay. What did I learn? It's about owning your mistakes and building something better from them. Her words were a balm on his raw, wounded soul. They didn't erase the failure, but they reframed it. They transformed it from a verdict into a lesson. He looked at the battered Mark II, and he didn't just see his own clumsiness. He saw a prototype. A first draft. Something to be improved upon, and then he looked at himself. He saw a boy who had been trying to fill a role that wasn't his, trying to wear a costume that didn't fit. He had been trying to be the next Iron Man, a sequel to a story that was already finished. He had been so focused on honoring Tony Stark's legacy that he had forgotten to even consider his own. The Technavore's words came back to him, but this time, he heard them differently. A child in a tin can. The villain had meant it as an insult. But maybe it was a diagnosis. The can was the problem. It was a borrowed can, a hand-me-down. It wasn't his. I can't be him, Izuku said, his voice no longer a whisper of despair, but a statement of dawning realization. I can't be Tony Stark. A small, genuine smile touched Pepper's lips. I know, she said softly. He wouldn't want you to be. Tony didn't leave behind the legacy protocol to create a carbon copy of himself. He did it to pass the torch, not the mask. He wanted someone to carry the heart of the hero, and to build their own armor around it. The pieces clicked into place in Izuku's mind, not with the terror of his earlier revelations, but with the clean, satisfying snap of a brilliant new schematic. He had been looking at the problem all wrong. The goal wasn't to learn how to be Iron Man. The goal was to use the tools of Iron Man to become a hero. His own hero. A fire began to burn in his chest, chasing away the cold shadows of his doubt. It was the familiar, intense fire of inspiration, the same fire he felt when he saw a new hero debut, the same fire that filled the pages of his notebooks. But this time, it was personal. This time, the subject he was analyzing was himself. He scrambled to his feet, his exhaustion forgotten, replaced by a manic, creative energy. He strode over to the main console, his fingers flying across the holographic keyboard. He wasn't just thinking, he was designing. He was building. The Mark II was too heavy, too slow. He began to mutter, the familiar, frantic litany of his analytical mind returning, but now it was filled with purpose, not anxiety. The power-to-weight ratio is all wrong for my fighting style. I'm not a brawler. I'm not a tank. I rely on analysis, on speed, on exploiting weaknesses. I don't need to be able to punch through a wall. I need to be able to analyze the wall's structural weak points and apply precise force. I need a suit that's an extension of my mind, not just a replacement for muscle I don't have. He pulled up a blank schematic on the main display. A fresh slate. He began to drag and drop components, his movements swift and certain. The color, he said, more to himself than to Pepper, who watched him with a look of quiet pride. It can't be red and gold. That's his symbol. It belongs to him. It belongs to the world's memory of him. He thought of his own hero costume sketches, the ones he had drawn in his notebooks since he was a child. The colors that represented his own heroic ideal. It needs to be green. A deep, heroic forest green, a symbol of growth, of potential. With accents. Red for the self-sacrificial spirit of a hero. And white for the smile that saves people, the symbol of peace and hope. He keyed in the color scheme, and the blank schematic on the screen transformed, glowing in a palette of deep green, vibrant red, and clean white. It already felt more like him. The focus needs to be different, he continued, his mind racing. Tony built weapons. He came from that world. I don't. My first instinct should never be to destroy. It should be to save, to contain, to disable. He started sketching out new systems, incorporating the ideas he and Peter had worked on. Non-lethal takedowns, the grenade launcher, integrated into the wrist gauntlets. EMP charges, calibrated for precision strikes to disable technology without causing a citywide blackout. Reinforced armor plating, not just for my own protection, but to act as a shield for others. I could use the suit to brace a fallen building, to protect civilians from an explosion. He began designing a new set of repulsors, based on their kinetic cushion idea. The repulsors can be modulated. A defensive mode, a wide-angle kinetic dampener. It could stop a speeding car without turning it into scrap metal. It could catch someone falling from a building. He was building a suit not just for fighting, but for rescuing. It was a fundamental shift in the Iron Man philosophy. And the interface. He breathed, his eyes gleaming with inspiration. This is the most important part. It needs to sync directly with my thought process. Not just responding to commands, but anticipating them. It needs to be able to process my analytical muttering, to take my battlefield observations and instantly convert them into tactical data, highlighting weak points, predicting enemy movements, running probability simulations in real time. He began writing lines of code for a new AI, one built on the foundation of legacy but tailored to his own unique mind. He needed a name for it, a name that would be a constant reminder of his own core principle, the phrase that had driven the heroes of his own world to be the best they could be. I'll call it Plus Ultra, he declared. The name felt right. It felt powerful. It was a bridge between his past and his future. Finally, he looked at the complete design taking shape on the screen. It was sleek, lighter than the Mark II but more durable. It was built for speed, analysis, and defense. It was a work of art. His art, but it needed a name. He needed a name. He thought of the jeers, the insults, the one word that had been used to define him his entire life. Deku. Useless. But then he remembered his first friend, Uraraka, from a world away. He remembered how she had looked at the name, and seen something different. Deku? Doesn't it sound a bit like Dikairu? Like you can do it? And he thought of the villain's sneer. Let's see if Stark's chosen charity case has what it takes, or if he's just another useless Deku. He would take the insult. He would reforge it, just as he was reforging this armor. He would wear it as a badge of honor. He would prove to the world, and more importantly, to himself, what that name could really mean. He keyed in the final designation for the project file. Project Deku. Armor model, Mark I. I know my hero name, he said, turning to face Pepper, his eyes burning with a newfound, unshakable resolve. He stood taller, the defeated slump gone, replaced by the proud, determined stance of a creator, a builder. A hero in the making. I will be the armored hero, Deku. Pepper Potts looked at the boy standing before her, no longer a child drowning in a borrowed suit, but a young man forging his own identity from the ashes of his failure. She saw the same fire, the same manic genius, the same stubborn refusal to stay down that she had fallen in love with all those years ago. But it was different, filtered through a new lens of selfless innocence and analytical brilliance. It was not a copy. It was an evolution. She smiled, a true, hopeful smile that reached her eyes. Then let's get to work, Deku, she said. Tony left behind a lot of scrap metal. I think it's time you built something beautiful with it. Izuku turned back to the screen, his mind already lost in the intricate dance of engineering and creation. The weight of iron was still there, but it was no longer a burden to be carried. It was the raw material of his own destiny, and he was ready to step into the fire and forge it.